Hello everyone, Bill Molyneux here for Bill's Wargame World, and welcome to my basement. Um, I'm going to do my introduction for my documentary on Donald Featherstone, Donald F. Featherstone of Great Britain, England. Um, there is a second Donald Featherstone who created the pink flamingo, the plastic pink flamingo. So for those new who never heard of Donald Featherstone, he is one of the top people that wrote books and helped the hobby of miniature wargame. Now, I consider H.G. Wells as the grandfather of wargaming, and then Donald Featherstone as the father of miniature wargaming. There are others, but we right now this documentary is going to be in three parts, three 15-minute sections. His early life um, and his early first couple books. Middle section is going to be authors and wargamers that have sent me stories regarding him and his interactions, including um, Ian Knight, famous historian of the Anglo-Zulu War. And then our conclusion video, 15 minutes or so, will be the conclusion of Donald Featherstone's life and where his books, manuscripts, and miniatures are. So, without further ado, I will be working on doing this first video. And as you see here, we have a Donald Featherstone style game set up. And we will begin with his early life and his first few books. Donald F. Featherstone was born the 20th March 1918. He lived to September 3rd, 2013. He was a British author of more than 50 books on wargaming and military history. Donald Featherstone was born in London, and during the Second World War he joined the Royal Armoured Corps. An account of his war experiences with the 51st Leeds Rifle Royal Tank Regiment can be found in his wargaming book, Lost Tales. And I exceptionally think it's a great book. Now, Donald had written several books on armored combat because he had all that experience. And we have a war gamer named Stuart Wilkes sent this in. The short version: when I lived between Southampton, I used to occasionally game with Don in his loft war games room. Even as a very senior gamer, he was up and down that ladder with ease. He told me on a special day, I can't remember the date, but he was the lone survivor of his tank mates. No one else was still alive of the tankers but him. And here we have another tank story from Jack Brendel of Arizona, saying that he met Donald Featherstone at a lecture at an HMGS event. And he talked about in North Africa, they would go out recovering 75 millimeter guns and other parts from knocked out Shermans and installing them in their Churchills. They were called Churchill NA-75s or something like that. And he said it was a lot of hard work in the desert. George Bradford published Armored Fighting News, who also had some knowledge about it and wrote a story about it. I don't remember much more than that. We're talking over 20 years ago. Game on from Jack Brendel. Well, Donald Featherstone started off with this book here, Donald Featherstone's War Games. Battles with Model Soldiers is the first book I had, and that was given to me by some friends in high school. Now, tackle with model soldiers this way. All right, we're going to spend a few minutes on this. You're going to see back then you had to make a mold to make a lot of your own figures. That's right. Wargamers have no idea how easy they have it. And here we have Donald Featherstone over a hot stove with a saucepan in his kitchen, boiling lead, pouring the molds in the kitchen. And of course, many spouses would refrain from pouring lead. Now, you got to admit, things have come a long ways in wargaming. And not just in making figures. I got to say that books and rules also are so plentiful now. The American War for Independence book that's shown right here This is one of my favorites of Donald's. It has some great rules, and I use his rules for my 54mm wargaming. They're phenomenal. This book contains some incredible scenarios, notes, and rules. There's several sets of rules in this book and about 12 battles and a timeline. And for the time period that this was printed, in 1972, I believe it is, it has 77 this was printed. It is one of the best American Revolutionary War wargaming books you can purchase. Highly recommend it. Well, this book, we're going to move on to another Donald Featherstone book from the American Revolution. We're going to this book, The War Game. And I believe a lot of people have written to me that the Donald Featherstone book here, it's not just Donald Featherstone, many authors of wargaming. This is the top dudes, including Donald Featherstone. And many wargamers have this on their shelf. In 1961, he organized the first United Kingdom War Games convention at his home in Southampton. 2 years later, he organized the first National War Games Championship convention at a local hotel, which was attended by about 100 wargamers from all over the country. In 1977, he was one of the founding members of the British Commission for Military History. In 1978, Donald Featherstone appeared on the BBC to promote the hobby. After a discussion with Paddy Griffith, Featherstone realized that wargaming as a hobby could aid considerably in understanding military history. All right. Well, the next wargamer that sent me in a note, he was in the Navy in the 60s, and this naval wargame book was on board their ship. And they were a refueling ship of some type, and they never saw action, but they were on the sea quite a bit. So they carved out ships, mostly American Civil War, according to his notes, and they made little Confederate ironclads out of soap bars and monitors, and their ships, he says, were actually better looking than the ones in Donald's book. He joked about that in his note to me, and he said that they formed great navies, and the Southern guys on the ship were carving Southern ironclads, while the Northern guys were carving monitors. And then they would have battles on their bunks, and they would use the bunk beds for the open sea. And I got to say, it's really been amazing to receive so many wonderful stories from so many different people, and how many people were impacted by Donald and his books. It's quite amazing. Well, we're going to end out part one of our three-part series, and I'm going to do the book list. War games, tackled with model soldiers, naval war games, air war games, bowmen of England, at them with the bayonet, advanced war games, war game campaigns, history project archives, handbook for model soldiers, battles with model soldiers, military modeling, MacDonald of the 42nd, conflict in Hampshire, Pointers, War Games Through the Ages, Volume 1, all for $1 for a day, solo wargaming, tank battles in miniature, battle notes for wargamers, Captain Carey's Blunder, War Games Through the Ages, Volume 2, War Games Through the Ages, Volume 3, Skirmish Wargaming, Wargaming Ancients and Medievals, War Games Through the Ages, Volume 4, Wargaming Airborne Operations, Wargaming Pike and Shot, Better Military Modeling, Tank Battles and Miniatures, Weapons and Equipment of the Victorian Soldier, Battles with Model Tanks, Featherstone's Complete Wargaming, Victoria's Enemies, the Peninsula War, Victorian Colonial Warfare in South Africa, Colonial Warfare in India and the Indian Mutiny, Khartoum, Tel Kabir, 1882. We also have the history of the English longbow, Omdurman, Redcoats of the Ra, Warriors on Warfare, Khaki and Red, Bowmen of England, Pens and Swords books, Battlefield Walker's Handbook, Donald Featherstone's Lost Tales, which includes his tank stories of being in World War II in a tank, Donald Featherstone's The Baggard Man, Victorian Cavalryman, and last but not least, Donald Featherstone's Wargaming Commando Operations. Wow, amazing. And I have to say, I hope you enjoyed part one of my Donald Featherstone documentary. Part two will include stories from other authors and their recollections of their adventurous stories and wargaming with Donald Featherstone. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you very much. Stay safe, be kind, and be courteous. Hello, Bill Molyneux here with part two of our Donald Featherstone documentary. Well, when you're an author like Donald Featherstone producing miniature wargaming books and historical books, like mad, you also meet other authors. And Donald Featherstone met Ian Knight, the famous Anglo-Zulu War historian and author himself. And Mr. Ian Knight was kind enough to send me a nice story about him and Donald Featherstone. Ian Knight says, I remember talking to him about his non-wargaming book on the death of the Prince Imperial in Zululand. He describes how the prince failed to mount his white horse when the Zulus attacked, and later in the book talks about how the officer held responsible for the prince's death, Captain Carey, was involved in an accident and kicked to death by a white horse. Spooky coincidence, I asked him. Genuinely, what was the source for that? As I wanted to look into it a bit further. He looked me straight in the eye and said, I made it up. Carey died of appendicitis. He probably had a burst appendix. But I wanted him to have a more dramatic end for my book. Well, what do you think of that? Thank you, Mr. Ian Knight, for sharing that story with me and all my viewers. Well, our next author was Mr. Howard Whitehouse, and he's written many wargaming books, and here's a story that he sent me. Howard says, I met Don in the early 1990s when he and a group of his friends toured Chattanooga area battlefields. We spent a few days around Chickamauga, Lookout Mountain, and Missionary Ridge. This one being mostly suburban housing nowadays. The thing he really liked was a place called Confederate Ram, which was a display of battlefields done with 30mm SAE figures and a primitive system of using of the equivalent of Christmas lights to show explosions. The spoken narrative was not unbiased, it was pretty hilarious. Don loved the whole thing, especially because he owned copies of those same figures himself, and to see the figures that were in the diorama that he actually possessed also. What a story from Howard. I know Howard spent a lot of time touring battlefields with Mr. Featherstone. And Howard, by the way, he runs the Gentleman's Wargaming Facebook site. And his rule book is really cool. So Howard also war games in the old Donald Featherstone style, which you're seeing now. And he also war games in flats and comic book figures too. So Howard, hopefully we'll see each other at one of the conventions and have a beer together like we do when we do meet up. And now that things are getting back to normal since COVID is over. All right, let's talk to we'll do our next story from our next author. Wargaming Airborne Operations by Donald Featherstone. Well, my good friend Martin Knight from England, who would visit me here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania when I lived in Gettysburg, he told me I had to include this book. And here's Martin in his military uniform. He was a Royal Marine, and got a couple pictures of him. But he had wargamed with Donald Featherstone in England, and he said this book was phenomenal. There we have a map of the Arnhem area for miniature wargaming. Now, Martin told me about the book and how it was written, in that Donald actually talked to other veterans for orders of battle. Here we have homemade gliders in 1/72nd scale, and it's just amazing to see homemade stuff. Now, this is just incredible. You see the box at the top? It has round paper discs, the size of a shilling or a penny. And then to represent paratrooper drop, you turn the box upside down and they flutter to the ground. So you can see the small shapes of paper slowly descending to the bottom of the wargaming table. Well, once they hit the table, they get picked up and replaced with figures. So now you see the paratroopers have landed. You notice one white one is on a stone wall. You'd roll a saving throw for that. Don had some wonderful ideas for airborne operations. And then once those figures or those paratroopers are placed, you put your figures down and you continue with your game. Very simple but realistic way to represent an airborne operation with paratroopers. And here we have some pictures of the Ozerberg Church outside of Arnhem. And what's neat about this wargame book is all the pictures of 1/72nd Airfix and Atlantic figures. And Martin Knight, I know this was your top book for me to put into this. So, and I know your wargaming group in England. I hope I did well for you on this. And thank you for your stories that Donald inspired so many people in England and your wargaming group there. Well, everyone, I forgot. I have to include the bridge battle. That's right. So Donald has this in here where you have the armored car recon force coming across the bridge, and they are just getting annihilated, just like in the movie. All right, let's go on to our next story. Well, I was asked to also talk about his military modeling book. Sean Simpson, I believe was his name, and he's from Southampton, England. And he wanted me to mention how Don, in his military modeling book, would take World War I German infantry, cut off the spike, and do a little work on them and turn them into the pith helmets for British infantry. Because in this time period, Airfix had a very small selection of figures, and Don was able to turn World War I into pith helmets to fight the Zulu. Now, there is a problem. Airfix did not make Zulu warriors. However, they did produce a box of Tarzan figures with natives in it. So there you have it. So in Don's book, he describes how you can use the natives from this box as your Zulus, and then your British, or turn your German World War I infantry into British. Amazing. All the things that Don taught different people for the hobby. And here we have a picture of Don and Peter Gilder, a very famous wargamer. He was on Battleground. And I'm just throwing in some pictures here and there. And I hope you're enjoying this video. Well, we have American wargamer Kenneth Van Pelt with the Penny Whistle guys. And Donald had a nice Kansas City connection and attended several of our local conventions. I had a chance to participate in a game that he umpired, and also to have him come by my game and throw some dice with us and move some miniatures. Wonderful hobbyists to have met and known. The local wargaming group that acted as his host were named Hats Off, Hatsoff, Historical and Tactical Society of the Followers of Featherstone. He also says, I look forward to your video. Very cool. Thank you, Kenneth Van Pelt. And we have some pictures of your gaming table here. Wonderful, wonderful stories that we're getting. So Kenneth and his group are from America, and they're in Kansas City. Well, our next message from a wargamer is from Eric Scott. He lives in Australia, and he asked me to do the notes he wrote up of Battle Notes for Wargamers, and by Donald Featherstone, printed in 1974. Now, this has a long list of scenarios with maps and how to set up your game and do these scenarios. They start off from the ancients, going all the way through to the American Revolution and the Boer War, the American Civil War, World War I, World War II, and the Korean War and Pork Chop Hill. That's right, you don't see a lot of the Korean War, and Donald even wrote about the Korean War for miniature wargaming. Well, I've put in a few of the maps here, so we're going to hit a few of them. Here's Wilson's Creek, 1861. And Donald has the scenario here for you and your map along with the units and how big your table should be. Now, Little Bighorn. Everyone in America, for some reason, wants to play the Battle of Little Bighorn or the Alamo. And he has the order of battle in here and a good map. And you can be playing the Battle of Little Bighorn. Now, this is interesting. The landings, Anzac landings of Gallipoli, being in America, we don't talk a lot about this, but I bet in New Zealand, Australia, and England, this is a good war game for you guys. Now, this is really neat. Donald also did a Boer War scenario, the Battle of Modden River, 1899. That's where the Scottish troops had to lay down and get up to those trenches. It was a real pain. Now, here we have Pork Chop Hill, and I've done this scenario. I have some Korean War figures in 54, and it's just really neat how diverse Donald was in his knowledge of military history and what he did for wargaming. And here he is with Peter Gilder again. I like that picture because Peter Gilder was very big in the wargaming hobby also, and he was on TV with Edward Woodward in Battleground. Wow. Battle Notes for Wargamers, Donald Featherstone, and Eric Scott wanted everyone to know how good this book is, and it's still available on Amazon. Well, this pretty much concludes part 2 of the Donald Featherstone story, and I need to say thank you to Mr. Ian Knight, famous historian of the Anglo-Zulu War, for his time to send me his story. I really appreciate that. And I'd also like to say thank you to Howard Whitehouse. Howard and I actually have had a few beers at wargaming conventions, and he is a phenomenal author and historian, and he's a good musician too. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and let's get prepared for part 3, which will conclude with where is Donald's books, manuscripts, and figures? Who has them, and where are they? I always like to end things with stay safe, be kind, and be courteous also. Well, Donald Featherstone died on 3rd September 2013 at the age of 95 from complications following a fall at home. Now, what happened to all his figures and his manuscripts and his other writings and magazines? Well, Mr. Daniel Boris of Ontario, Canada, he is in possession of them, and I'm going to read what he has written to me. Bill, to this point, I have restricted my comments to directly answer your one question relating to Don's armies now in my collection. I hope the following offers you clarity on the items from Don's collection and their being in my collection, having been directly purchased from Don's in and around the year 2000. My initial purchase was over 40 original manuscripts of Don's books, some unpublished. All are signed and dated as original by Don. The overall provenance is supported by as many letters regarding this still in my collection. I also purchased from Don over 100 magazine articles he has written and had published over the years. There are also his Ontario Model Soldier Society bulletins over the years initialed DF at the top right corners and several books from his private library. There, of course, are also over 5,000 figures from Don's collection purchased directly from Don by me. All of these are signed over to me with a letter of transfer. I go to these lengths of explanation bill to ensure ownership and provenance are clear. Please let me know if you have any other questions. British Model Soldier Society, BMSS, is opposed to Ontario Model Soldier Society. Regards, Danny. Now, Mr. Dan Boris, the Featherstone collection, what is phenomenal is he has set up a YouTube, Facebook, and blog site. You can go on his YouTube, the Daniel Boris and Donald Featherstone collection, and he has all the figures in different sections where you can watch the YouTube videos of the figures. He's done a fantastic job with music in the background, and he's up in Ontario, Canada, and there's his contact information and his location. And I really need to stress it is a wonderful thing he has done by keeping Donald Featherstone's figures on display for all of us to see through his videos that he has online. I truly hope you'll take the time to go on the Daniel Boris Featherstone collection and check out the videos he has. It is amazing the time he's taken. He has all the armies set up throughout the video, throughout the home of by time period. So you can visit the Waterloo area, for instance. And it's neat that these are in that state that you can see the figures. They're not boxed up in some cardboard box like they are at my house. Well, that's about it for now. I hope you'll reach out to Daniel if you have any questions about the collection. He is very, very cordial to chit chat with. That's about it for now. We're going to move on to my conclusion for our Donald Featherstone tribute documentary video. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed the Donald Featherstone documentary. And let's face it, I'll never be like Little Wars TV or Mark Fastaso's group with Mark's Game Room. I'm just Bill. But what you're seeing here are a lot of 54 millimeter figures. I have several Wargame conventions coming up, the Williamsburg Muster in Williamsburg, Virginia, Cold Wars in Gettysburg. I'll be using Donald Featherstone rules for the Civil War games. And these videos I'm making, they are going to help. I'm monetized, and that money that I get from YouTube, I am donating it, which I do each month. But this is going to save Weiss Fork Battlefield in Kinston, North Carolina, the second largest battle in North Carolina during the American Civil War. So I'm trying to keep Donald Featherstone's memory alive in my own little way. I hope you enjoyed this documentary. And all this stuff is being carted in the next few weeks all over the country. And stay safe, be kind, be courteous. And you know what? Buy a Donald Featherstone book on Amazon, eBay, or Kindle. Thank you, everyone.